The burnout was a creature of slow accumulation, a fine gray dust of stress and cynicism that had settled over 2 decades, layer by layer, until it formed a solid, suffocating mass in my chest. For 20 years, my world had been the sterile hum of air-conditioned offices, the blue glow of spreadsheets filled with numbers that represented lies, and the quiet, predatory hunt for financial ghosts in the gilded machinery of global commerce. I was a forensic accountant, and a damn good one. I'd spent the best years of my life navigating the labyrinthine corridors of other people's greed. And I was done. When I finally walked away, taking an early retirement that was less a golden handshake and more a non-disclosure agreement sealed with a generous pension, I had only one desire: silence. Not the dead, humming silence of a server room, but the living silence of wind moving through ancient trees. I found it, or so I thought, in a forgotten corner of the Sierra Nevada mountains, a small, gated community called Whispering Pines. The name was aspirational. The pines were certainly there, but the whispering was often drowned out by the quiet judgment of its residents. My prize was a small cabin, a relic from a time before the developer had manicured the landscape into a series of pristine, identical lots. It sat on a sliver of land, a 25-acre geographical anomaly, shaped like a jagged arrowhead, wedged between two larger parcels and touching the community road at only a single point. It had been owned by an old prospector named Elias Vance, who, according to local legend, had filed the deed in the 1950s and then vanished into the wilderness he so loved. The land was considered an undevelopable, orphaned plot the Homeowners Association had tried and failed to absorb for years due to the tangled title. I found the title through a specialist firm I'd used in my old life, tracked down Elias's last living heir, a great-grandnephew in another state, and made him an offer. He was so shocked anyone had found him, let alone wanted the worthless plot, that he agreed to sign it over via a quitclaim deed for the legally required consideration of one U.S. quarter. I mailed him the coin. He mailed back the notarized document, and just like that, for 25 cents and a few thousand in legal fees, the cabin was mine. It was perfect. Rough-hewn cedar, a stone fireplace big enough to stand in, and a porch that looked out over a deep, wooded ravine. It was the antithesis of my former life. It was real. While cleaning out a dusty footlocker in the attic, I found an old leather-bound journal. It was Elias Vance's. Most of it was filled with sketches of birds and rambling thoughts on the weather. But some entries were odd. He wrote of heavy rock that fools the pan, and a strange pull on the compass needle near the ravine's heart. One line stuck with me. There's more than just gold in these hills, something the modern man needs more than glitter. I chalked it up to the charming fantasies of a lonely prospector and put the journal on the mantel, a piece of the cabin's history. My first week was bliss. I sanded the old floorboards and rechinked the logs. I hung a set of simple bamboo wind chimes on the porch, their gentle, hollow clacking, the only percussion I needed. As I worked, I noticed an unmarked white van parked for 2 days on the road bordering the ravine. A couple of men in plain vests spent hours with strange equipment, poles they would press into the ground, taking readings. I assumed it was a county water table survey or something similar and paid it no mind. I was staining the front door a deep forest green when a golf cart, unnaturally silent on the asphalt, pulled up to the edge of my small driveway. A woman with hair pulled back into a bun so tight it seemed to stretch the skin around her eyes stepped out. She wore a crisp, white polo shirt with a WPHOA logo embroidered on the chest and held a clipboard like a scepter. "I'm Carol Bradshaw," she announced, her voice a low, authoritative hum. "President of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association." "Liam Carter," I said, offering a hand I'd just wiped on a rag. "Nice to meet you." She ignored my hand, her eyes scanning my property with the intensity of a targeting system. Her gaze fell on the wind chimes. A muscle in her jaw tightened. Article 7, Section B, Paragraph 4 of the Whispering Pines Covenants, conditions, and restrictions clearly prohibits any exterior hangings that produce audible noise. "They're just quiet wind chimes," I said, taken aback by her immediate hostility. "Compliance is not subjective, Mr. Carter," she snapped. Her eyes then went to the door, and the look of irritation intensified into something closer to rage. "And that color is completely unauthorized. You will receive a formal notice. I'm honestly shocked you thought any of this was acceptable. You have no idea what this land, what this entire community is supposed to represent." Before she could stop herself, a strange intensity burned in her eyes. "Some places are more valuable than they appear." She seemed to catch herself, the mask of cold bureaucracy slamming back into place. "You'll find we take our rules very seriously here." She tore a sheet from the clipboard, a preliminary warning, and thrust it at me before marching back to her cart. I was left standing there, not just confused by the rules, but by the sheer, disproportionate anger in her eyes. It wasn't about wind chimes. It was about my very presence here. She'd wanted this land, I realized, and she was furious that I had gotten it. The first formal fine arrived a week later, tucked under the windshield wiper of my truck. It was for $50, for failure to rectify an auditory nuisance. I had, in fact, taken the wind chimes down, but I had forgotten to remove the small, unobtrusive hook. The fine was for the hook. The citation noted, with breathtaking pettiness, that the empty hook implied the intent to create an auditory nuisance. It was an accusation of a future crime. I unscrewed the hook with a sigh and mailed a check. I was here for peace, not war. I could afford to lose a skirmish. My compliance, however, seemed to embolden her. My application to the Architectural Review Committee for my forest green door was, unsurprisingly, denied. The letter, signed by Carol, informed me that I had 3 days to paint my door woodland brown, or face a daily fine of $100. I bought the woodland brown, a color with all the personality of wet cardboard, and spent a weekend sanding away the beautiful green and applying the HOA-approved sludge. Every time I looked at it, I felt a small, hot spark of resentment. This was the beginning of her campaign of 1,000 paper cuts. A notice appeared, because my stack of firewood was not of uniform length. I was fined because a package was left on my porch for more than 3 hours. My attempt at a native wildflower garden, a vibrant, chaotic splash of California poppies and lupines, was met with a $75 fine for unauthorized landscaping and an order to replace it with plants from the approved plant list. A document filled with thirsty, non-native species like Japanese boxwood and English lavender. It was then I started a new file on my laptop. In my old job, we called it a dossier. It was second nature to me, the methodical collation of data to build a profile. I took a high-resolution photo of every notice, scanned every letter, and saved every email. I created a spreadsheet, logging the date, the bylaw cited, the fine amount, and my action of compliance. I hated that I was doing it. This was the exact type of soul-crushing work I had retired to escape. But there was a cold, familiar logic to it that I found grimly comforting. You don't go into a fight without knowing your adversary. And Carol Bradshaw was, in her own despotic way, a formidable adversary. My early sense that she had wanted this land was hardening into a certainty. Her harassment felt too personal, too targeted, to be random. She was trying to break me, to force me out, But why? One evening, I saw her golf cart parked at the end of the cul-de-sac, partially obscured by a manzanita bush. She was watching my house through binoculars. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was an obsession. I went inside, opened my laptop, and created a new entry. Subject Bradshaw, Carol. Activity visual surveillance of my property from a concealed position. The old instincts were kicking in. The part of my brain that sees patterns and predicts escalations. It told me that letters and fines were just the opening act. The escalation, when it came, was both predictable and cowardly. I walked out onto my porch one crisp September morning to find my bird feeder on the ground. The rope it hung from cleanly sliced by a sharp blade. It was a deliberate act. A message: I can touch your things. I can break your joy. I photographed the severed rope, the knife marks clear in the morning light. I logged it all in my dossier under a new tab, Property Damage. There was no point in confronting her directly. The lack of proof was her shield. So, I decided to change the equation. That afternoon, I drove into town and purchased a set of high-end, motion-activated security cameras disguised as bits of tree bark and rock. They streamed high-resolution video to a secure cloud server, an investment in unimpeachable evidence. I spent the next day placing them, one camouflaged in the gnarled bark of the oak tree where the feeder had hung, another hidden in a dense pyracantha bush, covering my front porch, a third mounted high on the cabin's eaves, giving me a wide-angle view of my entire property. While reviewing the footage from that first day, I saw something that pricked my attention. The same unmarked white van I had seen weeks ago drove slowly past my house, the driver's face obscured, before turning around and leaving the community. It felt strange, out of place. I saved the clip, labeling it Suspicious Vehicle. A few weeks later, my new HOA-approved garden of Japanese boxwoods and English lavender began to die. A sickening brown patch radiating outwards from the center. It was poison. My phone buzzed with a motion alert from 2:17 a.m. the night before. I pulled up the footage. The infrared video was crystal clear. A figure in a dark hooded sweatshirt moved stealthily across my lawn, carrying a small pump-action sprayer. The figure methodically doused my plants. Then, the gift. As they turned to leave, the hood slipped back. The sharp image of Carol Bradshaw's face filled my screen. Her expression, one of grim satisfaction. I saved the video to 3 separate encrypted hard drives. Chain of custody. Incontrovertible proof. The next day, I saw her at the community mailboxes. "Morning, Carol," I said neutrally. "Mr. Carter," she replied, not looking at me. "I noticed your garden isn't looking well. Such a shame. Sometimes the soil here can be quite unwelcoming." It was a clear taunt. "Yes, a real mystery," I said, meeting her gaze. "Looks almost like someone poisoned it. I'm thinking of sending a soil sample to a lab. Might even file a report with the sheriff's department for vandalism." For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not fear, but calculation. She had expected me to be defeated, not defiant. She had underestimated me. The game had changed. She had crossed a line from paper to physical action. And in doing so, she had given me my first piece of solid, actionable evidence. The file was growing, and with it, a cold, hardening resolve. Having failed to dislodge me with fines and covert vandalism, Carol shifted her tactics to my reputation. The battlefield was the official Whispering Pines community Facebook group, a digital space she wielded like a state-run media outlet. Her first post was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive slander, a friendly reminder to all residents. It began, Whispering Pines is a community built on mutual respect. Unfortunately, it has come to the board's attention that some are choosing to disregard our landscaping guidelines, leaving blighted, dead patches of earth as an eyesore for their neighbors. She didn't use my name, but she didn't have to. The comments rolled in. So sad when people have no pride in their homes. Thanks for staying on top of this. Carol. She had poisoned my garden and was now publicly shaming me for the results of her own crime. The social climate changed almost overnight. My friendly waves were met with averted eyes. I was being isolated, painted as the troublemaker who didn't belong. A few days later, I was at the small community market when I saw Carol talking in a hushed, intense voice with a man I recognized from the landscaping company that held the lucrative HOA contract. He was a big man with a perpetual scowl. I pretended to inspect a display of avocados nearby, positioning myself to overhear. "Final report from GeoCorp confirms it," the man was saying. "Right under that whole area. The access point is the key." "I know that, Dennis," Carol hissed, her voice tight with a mixture of excitement and fury. "I've been trying to get that worthless plot for years. Even before this. Now that Carter character shows up out of nowhere with a deed, we can't let that squatter get in the way." My blood ran cold. GeoCorp, a geological analytics firm. "So what's the plan?" Dennis asked. "The plan is to make his life a living hell until he leaves," Carol whispered fiercely. "And he will leave. He has to. We're talking about millions. Dennis, millions." I moved away before they could see me, my mind racing. It all clicked into place. The unmarked van, the survey crew, Elias Vance's cryptic notes about heavy rock, Carol's disproportionate rage, her obsession with my specific plot of land. This wasn't about a broken rulebook. It was about a hidden jackpot. She knew something about my land, and she was conspiring with her relative Dennis the landscaper to get it. I went home and immediately logged the conversation in my dossier, word for word as best I could remember. Then, I sat on my porch, the sky turning a bruised purple, and dialed a number I hadn't called in almost a year. "Marcus," a familiar, clipped voice answered. "Marcus, it's Liam." "Liam, I was wondering when you'd get bored of whittling sticks. Don't tell me you're ready to come back." "Not exactly," I said. "I need a favor. I have a strong suspicion that the president of my HOA is engaged in a conspiracy to illegally seize my property, which may have significant undisclosed value. I need a full workup on her, Carol Bradshaw, and her brother-in-law, Dennis Nowak, who runs Sierra Landscaping Solutions. More importantly, I need a deep dive into the financials of the Whispering Pines HOA, and I need to know if a company called GeoCorp Analytics filed any recent geological survey reports with the county." Marcus was silent for a moment. "Liam, you went from taking down international money laundering rings to feuding with a suburban mom over a patch of dirt. This patch of dirt might be worth millions, and she's committing felonies to get it," I said. "She's poisoning my garden, slandering me, and trying to run me out of my home. I need leverage, the real kind." "Leverage," Marcus repeated, the word tasting familiar to him. "Dirty books are my favorite kind of literature. I'll get an analyst on it. Consider it a professional courtesy." After I hung up, I felt a familiar, cold sense of purpose settle over me. For months, I had been on the defensive. Now, I was finally going on the offensive. I was taking the fight to my own territory, the dark, hidden world of numbers, records, and secrets where people's true selves are revealed. The quiet war of attrition escalated to a new, more alarming level. A few weeks after my call with Marcus, Carol, perhaps sensing that her social campaign was only hardening my resolve, decided to bring in outside forces. She decided to weaponize the authorities. It began with a visit from a man from County Code Enforcement. He was a harried-looking fellow who introduced himself as Dave. "Got an anonymous complaint," he said, avoiding eye contact. "Allegation of running an unlicensed commercial business from a residential property." It was her Facebook post, made real. "My woodworking?" I asked. "It's a hobby." I led him to my impeccably clean and organized garage workshop. Dave looked around, his weary expression softening. "This is a nice setup," he admitted. He asked a few pro forma questions, and could clearly see there was no business being run. As he was leaving, he paused. "You know," he said, lowering his voice, "we've been getting a lot of calls from this neighborhood lately. A lot. Mostly nonsense. Wastes a lot of our time." It was as close as he could come to saying, "Your neighbor is a serial complainer, and you're her latest target." I found out where it would stop 2 weeks later. It was nearly 9 o'clock at night. The blinding flash of red and blue lights filled my cabin. I went to the window and saw a sheriff's patrol car parked in my driveway. 2 deputies were walking up to my porch. "Evening, sir." The older one, Deputy Miller, said. "We received a call for a wellness check at this address. Is everything all right?" A wellness check. I was completely bewildered. "I'm fine." "The call came in from a neighbor," Miller said, his eyes doing a quick, professional sweep of the room behind me. "Said they hadn't seen you in a while, heard some strange noises, and were concerned for your well-being. Mentioned you might be unstable." Unstable. The word hung in the cold night air. This was a clear and calculated attempt to create an official record questioning my sanity. For someone with my professional background, where a security clearance depended on a perception of absolute stability, this was a particularly insidious attack. My neighbor's name wouldn't be Carol Bradshaw, would it? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Miller's expression didn't change, but a flicker of understanding crossed his face. "Sir, we have to follow up on every call." "I understand completely," I said, opening the door wider. They came in, saw the crackling fire, the book on the chair. It was the very picture of domestic tranquility. They were satisfied this was another bogus call. "We're sorry to have bothered you, Mr. Carter," Miller said as they were leaving. "It's more than a bother, Deputy," I said, my voice hardening slightly. "It's harassment. This is the second time in a month a county official has been sent to my home on a baseless complaint originating from the same person. Filing a false report is a crime, isn't it?" Miller sighed. "It is, but proving intent is difficult. My advice is to keep a log. Start a record." "I've already done that, Deputy," I said. His eyebrows rose slightly. He was looking at me differently now. I wasn't the hysterical victim he might have expected. I was calm, organized, and I knew the language. "Good," he said with a firm nod. "You have a good night, sir." I watched them leave, the flashing lights retreating down the dark road. I locked the door, my hands trembling slightly, not with fear, but with a cold, focused rage. She had crossed a critical line. She had used the power of the state to intimidate me. She had tried to brand me as unstable. It was a vicious, calculated move, and it was going to be her last. The final escalation, the act that severed any lingering thought I had of de-escalation, was a direct and deeply personal threat. A few days after the sheriff's visit, I received an email from Marcus. The subject line was simply, "File attached." The body of the email contained a single sentence. "Your suburban mom is more interesting than she looks. And you were right about the dirt. Call me." The attached file was a locked, encrypted container. I opened it to reveal a meticulously compiled report. Marcus's team had been thorough. They had cracked open the Whispering Pines HOA finances. It was all their inflated invoices from Sierra Landscaping Solutions. HOA funds used to pay for Carol's property taxes. A board retreat in Aruba. It was a classic case of small-time embezzlement. More damningly, they had found the GeoCore Analytics Survey, filed with the County Planning Office under a commercial prospectus application. It detailed a massive, incredibly pure deposit of columbite tantalite coltan in the ravine. The report valued the mineral rights at over $10 million. And my odd, arrowhead-shaped plot contained the sole viable access point. The report also noted that a private investigator had been making inquiries about my federal employment history. The request had come from Carol Bradshaw. She was coming for me, and she was arming herself. She arrived at my house that afternoon. She didn't bother with her golf cart. She drove her oversized SUV right up my driveway, parking it at an aggressive angle that blocked my truck. I met her on the porch. She was holding a manila folder, brandishing it like a weapon. "We need to talk, Carter," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "I did some digging on you," she sneered. "All that time in Washington, D.C. All those years with the government. Very secretive, very sensitive." She was bluffing, but she had a direction. People with pasts like yours, they can be a liability, especially if they start to seem unstable. She tapped the folder. "I know people. A simple phone call, a friendly tip to your former employers, a word about the police being called to your house for a wellness check, a concern about your mental state, a suggestion that you might be a security risk. I wonder what a call like that would do to your fat government pension. I wonder if they'd have to come and have a little chat with you." This was it. The ultimate threat. She was threatening my entire past, my security, my carefully negotiated peace. The world I had so desperately wanted to escape was being used as a weapon against me. A profound, icy calm settled over me. The fear was gone, replaced by something cold and hard and absolute. I let a small, humorless smile touch my lips. "Is that all, Carol?" My lack of reaction unnerved her. "You need to leave," she spat. "This is my town. I want you to pack up and go. Sign the property over to the HOA for $1 to cover your troubles. If you don't, I make the call." She threw the manila folder onto the porch. It was empty, a pure bluff. I went inside, my movements deliberate. I sat at my computer and opened the dossier, the videos, the financial records, the GeoCore report. I opened a new document and began to type. I wrote out a timeline, a summary of events, a list of potential criminal charges, felony embezzlement, wire fraud, conspiracy, filing false police reports, extortion. I compiled video clips, bank statements, and email chains into a single, devastating presentation. For 20 years, I had built cases like this against people who thought they were untouchable. The war was over. It was time for the execution. The venue for Carol's coronation, and what she intended to be my public execution, was the Whispering Pines Community Clubhouse. Nearly every resident was there, drawn by an emergency notice, urgent HOA meeting resolution regarding the status of the unplatted Vance property. My property. I arrived early and took a seat at the back. Carol stood at a lectern, flanked by a slick-looking lawyer, Mr. Davies. She radiated an aura of absolute triumph. This was her moment. The meeting started promptly. Carol tapped the microphone. "For months," she began, her voice resonating with false sincerity, "we have been dealing with a difficult situation regarding the old Vance cabin. Our legal counsel has determined that this parcel was, in fact, never legally severed from the original community plat. Therefore, it is, and has always been, community common property." A gasp went through the crowd. This was her play, not just to kick me out, but to seize the land. The lawyer, Davies, stepped forward. "We have filed a motion for summary judgment to reclaim the property on behalf of the Homeowners Association. A preliminary injunction will be served tomorrow, barring Mr. Carter from the premises." Carol beamed. "This land will be used to create a new community park, an asset for us all." The crowd applauded. They had defeated the outsider. Carol looked directly at me, her eyes glinting with victory. "Mr. Carter, do you have anything to say before we vote?" It was a rhetorical question, a final twist of the knife. I stood up slowly. The room fell silent. I walked calmly to the front and placed my slim leather portfolio on the lectern. "I do, actually," I said, my voice quiet but carrying. "My name is Liam Carter. Before I retired, I was a lead forensic investigator for the United States Department of Justice, specializing in asset forfeiture and complex financial fraud." A change rippled through the room. The certainty on people's faces began to curdle. Carol's smile faltered. "In my line of work, I learned that everything leaves a trail." I continued. I opened my portfolio and took out a simple USB flash drive. "Would you mind if I borrowed your projector?" Before they could react, I walked to the laptop and inserted my drive. The HOA logo vanished, replaced by a high-resolution time-stamped infrared image of Carol poisoning my garden. The crowd gasped. "This is Exhibit A," I said coldly. "Felony vandalism." Click. The screen showed the HOA's bank records. "And this is Exhibit B, a forensic audit." I walked them through it, the kickbacks to her brother-in-law's company, the vacation to Aruba, the property tax payments. "This is called embezzlement and wire fraud. She used your money to fund her life." The room was filled with angry shouts. Carol was ashen white. Her lawyer was slowly backing away from her. "And why?" I asked, my voice cutting through the noise. "Why go to such lengths?" I brought up Elias Vance's old journal. The original owner of my cabin, Elias Vance, wasn't just a prospector. He wrote in his journal about heavy rock and a strange pull on the compass needle. He knew something was here. Click. A photo of the unmarked Geocore van. Some of you may have seen these surveyors from Geocore Analytics a few months back. Click. A slide with the quotes I had overheard between Carol and her brother-in-law Dennis. Final report confirms it. "Can't let that squatter get in the way. Millions. Dennis. Millions." Carol and her brother-in-law, I explained, obtained a copy of that survey, which the rest of the board was never shown. Then, for the finale, I displayed the Geocore survey map, the massive coltan deposit highlighted, my property, the sole access point. This was never about bylaws. It was about a conspiracy to defraud this community and to steal a $10 million asset from me. I turned to look directly at Carol, whose entire world had just collapsed? And finally, the threat you made against my government pension and my security clearance. That is called extortion of a former federal agent. The room was in stunned silence. There were no flashing lights, no dramatic arrests, just the cold, hard facts. "Tomorrow morning," I announced, my voice resonating with finality. "This entire dossier, with all the supporting evidence, will be delivered to the State Attorney General's office for the fraud and embezzlement, the County Sheriff for the vandalism and false reports, and the Department of Justice Inspector General for the extortion. I will be pursuing all available state and federal charges. I will also be filing a civil RICO suit against Ms. Bradshaw, Mr. Nowak, and any board member who knowingly participated in this conspiracy. Thank you for your time." I packed my portfolio and walked out of the clubhouse, leaving behind the smoldering ruins of Carol Bradshaw's little kingdom. The aftermath was not instantaneous, but it was inevitable and absolute. As promised, the next morning, my attorney filed the meticulously prepared dossiers with the respective state and federal agencies. Within a week, the quiet streets of Whispering Pines were disturbed by the arrival of unfamiliar sedans. Plainclothes investigators from the State Attorney General's office served a subpoena at the HOA office, seizing every computer and file cabinet. Carol Bradshaw and her brother-in-law, Dennis Nowak, were arrested 2 weeks later. It wasn't a dramatic scene at a public meeting, but a quiet, humiliating apprehension at their respective homes on a Tuesday morning. Faced with the mountain of evidence, the unshakable video, the forensic accounting that laid their conspiracy bare, they both took plea deals. Carol was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison for wire fraud and embezzlement. Dennis got 18 months for his role in the kickback scheme. The court ordered them to pay full restitution to the HOA and a separate, significant civil settlement to me. Whispering Pines was in chaos for a few months, but it was a cleansing fire. An interim board was appointed, made up of decent people who were horrified by the betrayal. They rewrote the CC&Rs, eliminating the petty, vindictive rules. The approved color palette was expanded, and a special native species clause was added to the landscaping rules, a small, ironic tribute to my first battle. Slowly, my relationship with my neighbors repaired itself. There were apologies, most of them sincere. They had been manipulated, and now that the spell was broken, they were embarrassed and eager to make amends. The community began to heal. My life finally found the rhythm I had craved. The tech conglomerate finalized the deal for the mineral rights. I used a portion of the money to establish a permanent conservation trust for the ravine, ensuring it would remain wild forever. I painted my front door a deep, rich forest green. I hung a new set of bamboo wind chimes from the oak tree. Their gentle, clacking song was no longer a violation, but a quiet celebration. It was the sound of a hard-won, deeply valued peace.